On November 22nd, 1922, and in Gosport, Indiana, Eugene Morrison Stoner was born into an America heading toward depression and war. Nothing in that small farming world suggested destiny. He would never attend college. He would not come from a government arsenal or an elite engineering school. He would come from factory floors, tool benches, and the quiet obsession of a man who kept drawing when others went to sleep. By 1939, after graduating from Long Beach Polytechnic High School, Stoner went straight to work at Vega Aircraft Companies in California, installing armament on training aircraft. The work demanded precision, and it exposed him to something the firearms world largely ignored: aircraft-grade aluminum. Traditional rifles were still built around on wood and steel, strong, familiar, and heavy. Wood warped with moisture. Steel endured recoil but punished the soldier's back. Aluminum was lighter and corrosion-resistant, and if engineered correctly, it could handle stress. No one had proven it could survive in a combat rifle. Stoner noticed that, filed it away, and kept moving. Then came December 7th, 1941, Pearl Harbor. At Hösten Stoner enlisted in the U.S. Marine Corps, specializing in aviation ordnance. Sent to the South Pacific and northern China, he didn't fight as an infantryman, but he lived beside the real battlefield truth. Weapons fail. He watched Marines wrestle with the M1 Garand, excellent yet too heavy for jungle war. He saw the M1918 Browning automatic rifle, powerful and near 20 pounds. He studied the higher M1941 Johnson rifle and light machine gun, innovative but dismissed as too complex. And at night he drew. Not fantasies, solutions. By April 43rd he had built two 30-caliber carbine prototypes who had in spare hours, incomplete, but revealing the ideas that would define his future. A straight-line stock that drove recoil backward instead of upward, a simplified gas concept that avoided heavy operating rods and modular construction that could be stripped quickly. Stoner wasn't inventing in the abstract. He was responding methodically to problems he'd watched in American hands. When the war ended in August 1945, the 22-year-old came home with a mechanic's eye, a machinist's discipline, and a notebook full of unanswered questions. But Chapter 2, Armalite's Bet and the Rifle That Failed Too Loudly, 1945-1957. The gamble finally arrived with Armalite, a small Fairchild division created to bring modern aerospace methods into firearms. On October 4, 1954, Stoner was hired as a chief design engineer. Armalite wasn't a traditional gun company. It was essentially an R&D shop, hoping to license breakthroughs to larger manufacturers. That suited him perfectly. In 1955, the U.S. Army announced it wanted a new standard rifle to replace the M1 Garand, firing the 0762 Tornado cartridge, reliable, accurate, and ideally lighter than the Garand's at 12 pounds. Established giants submitted conventional answers. Armalite submitted a provocation, the Harder 10 knife. Early results were electric. Testers praised the AR-10 as the most controllable automatic rifle they'd fired with full-power ammunition. Accuracy was excellent. Under 2 inches at 100 yards, outperforming rivals like the T-44 and the FAL. Reliability looked good, until the Army's endurance and abuse regimen turned brutal. In one critical test, the AR-10's composite barrel, a steel liner inside an aluminum sleeve, burst catastrophically, destroying the rifle. The Army rejected the design, writing that it could take 5 years or more to fix and adopt. In 1957, the Army chose the A-44, which entered service as the M14. The AR-10 lost the American contest, but Stoner learned exactly why. The composite barrel had been pushed by Armalite leadership over his objections to save weight. He immediately designed an all-steel barrel, too late for U.S. trials, but not too late for the world. Armalite licensed AR-10 production to the Dutch firm Artillery Inrichtingen. Fewer than 10,000 were produced, sold to Sudan, Portugal, and others. Portuguese paratroopers caught in Africa praised its accuracy and reliability. Even a handful that reached French Foreign Legion. Hansen-Tanchada earned glowing field reports. The verdict was clear. The concept worked. The timing and the politics had failed it. Chapter 3. The Smaller Bullet, the Bigger War, and a Watermelon Conversion, 1957-1963. While the AR-10 struggled for acceptance, a new question spread through military studies. Did soldiers truly need full-power cartridges? World War II and Korea suggested most fights happened under 300 yards. Lighter ammunition meant more rounds carried, longer sustained fire, and better control in automatic bursts. In early 1957, new requirements called for a Osmol-caliber high-velocity rifle. Stoner's answer was simple. Scale down the AR-10's architecture. Keep the straight-line design, the aluminum receiver, the modular construction, and the gas system, but chamber it for 3 Remington. The cartridge was small, often under 60 grains, yet pushed past 3,000 feet per second, producing severe wounding through yawing and fragmentation in tissue. It meant a soldier could carry roughly 300 rounds instead of around 140 of 7.62 NATO. The first AR-15 prototype, Nate, was completed in May 1957 with a 20-round magazine. It weighed about 6 pounds, barely half the weight of the M14, and measured 39 inches, compared with the M14's 44. Early tests claimed it could pierce a steel helmet at 500 yards and a standard flak jacket at 300. The Army dismissed it, fresh off adopting the M14 and unwilling to embrace what it viewed as a varmint cartridge. The Ordnance Corps had opposed the rifle, and some accounts framed that resistance as personal as well as institutional. Armalite had declined Ordnance attempts to take over AR-10 development rights, fearing the design would be buried. Armalite tried foreign sales, but U.S. aid policy effectively pushed allies toward compatibility with American standard arms, meaning 7.62 NATO but not 223. By 1959, Armalite's finances were collapsing. In February 1959, it sold the AR-15 rights to Kota for $75,000 plus royalties. The rifle looked like another brilliant dead end. Then came a party. On July 4, 1960, quote, at a Maryland farm barbecue hosted by Richard Boutell, Fairchild president and former Armalite president, a Colt salesman named William Mullen brought an AR-15 hoping for a lucky audience. He got one. General Curtis LeMay, Vice Chief of Staff of the U.S. Air Force, legendary, impatient with bureaucracy, and famous for pushing through what he believed worked. Mullen set watermelons at 50 and 150 yards. LeMay fired. The melons exploded. Under the high-velocity 223 impacts, the rifle ran cleanly through magazine after magazine. When told one melon remained, LeMay supposedly said, "Let us eat the son of a bitch." But he didn't stop asking questions. The AR-15's 6-pound reloaded weight versus the M14's 9 to 12 thou, the ammunition load advantage, 240 rounds of 5.56 versus roughly 100 of 7.62 in comparable carry weight, and marksmanship results showing 43% of AR-15 shooters qualifying as expert versus pod at 22%, with the M14. LeMay ordered 500 rifles and hired 8.5 million rounds on the spot, then discovered the Army-controlled procurement. The request was blocked. Even President Kennedy was advised that 2 calibers would complicate logistics. LeMay refused to fold. Through 1961-1962 quarto, he pressed relentlessly. Formal requests, Pentagon meetings, data, and political pressure. Promoted in summer 1961 to Air Force Chief of Staff, he pushed for 80,000 rifles. The Army kept resisting, until Vietnam forced the issue. By late on 1961, reports from South Vietnam described Viet Cong armed with AK-47s as outgunning troops carrying older rifles. The AK's intermediate cartridge concept matched the AR-15's logic: lighter, controllable, deadly in jungle ranges. McNamara authorized a trial. 1,000 AR-15 size went to Vietnam. Special Forces and South Vietnamese units praised the rifle's weight, handling, ammunition capacity, and combat effect. Some South Vietnamese soldiers reportedly refused to give them back, saying the AR-15 made them feel like they had the firepower of multiple men. McNamara demanded clarity. In early 1962, he ordered comparative testing against the M14 and the AK-47. The Thud-Hitch report, released in summer 1962, concluded the AR-15 was superior to the M14 across measured categories, and that the M14 hadn't even clearly outclassed the AK-47. The Army protested bias. McNamara decided anyway. In November 1962, he approved initial procurement for the Air Force and Army Special Forces. And then, the war punished the paperwork. Chapter 4. The Rifle That Betrayed the Men Carrying It, 1964-1968. In official tests, the M16 had looked like the future. Lighter, flatter shooting, controllable, accurate. In Vietnam's humidity and chaos, it began to look like a trap. By late 1965, reports arrived that rifles were jamming in combat, especially failing to extract spent cases. Some soldiers were found dead with rifles torn open beside them, trying to clear stoppages under fire. The weapon earned bitter nicknames: the Mattel Toy. Troops scavenged enemy AK-47s, risking punishment to carry a rifle they trusted. One Marine letter captured the outrage in brutal terms: a platoon cut from 72 to 19, with many of the dead found beside disassembled M16s. In a fall 1967 survey, 80% of 1,585 troops reported stoppages while firing. The technological advantage had become a liability. Stoner, stunned, flew to Vietnam in early 1967 and found what the battlefield had already declared: the base design wasn't the core problem. Changes and omissions were: first, the powder. The rifle had been designed around IMA 475, a relatively clean-burning stick powder used in testing. The Army switched, without consulting the designer, to WC846 ball powder, made by Olin Matheson. A change tied in the narrative to relationships with procurement. Ball powder burned dirtier, leaving more residue, and it pushed pressures that raised the cyclic rate from about 750 toward 1,000 times. That meant faster extraction from hotter, dirtier chambers. Cases stuck, rims tore, and the only reliable fix was a cleaning rod down the barrel, an impossibility mid-firefight. Second, the missing chrome. Stoner had specified a chrome plating in chamber and bore to resist corrosion, standard for rifles expected to live in humidity. Colt requested it. The Army deleted it to save money. In Vietnam, unplated chambers corroded quickly, friction increased, and extraction failures multiplied. Later testimony would call the lack of chrome plating the single most critical factor. Third, the maintenance lie. The Army marketed the rifle as self-cleaning. Cleaning kits weren't issued, manuals didn't arrive. Soldiers went into jungle war barely familiar with the weapon and unequipped to maintain it. Yet the gas system routed hot gases into the receiver and demanded regular cleaning, especially with dirtier powder and corrosive conditions. A documented tragedy from the investigation told the story. In one Marine unit, only one man had a cleaning rod, running up and down the line clearing jams until he was killed doing it. An avoidable death blamed on the Army's failure to provide basic equipment. Fourth, the forward assist. Stoner had deliberately omitted it. If the bolt wouldn't close, forcing it could make a bad situation worse. Ordnance insisted anyway. The forward assist let soldiers drive rounds into dirty chambers, increasing extraction stress and worsening failures. Tests at Rock Island Arsenal reportedly warned of this risk. Warnings ignored. By spring 1967, it became a national scandal. Families wrote Congress. Newspapers followed. On May 15, 1967, Representative Richard Icord of Missouri convened a special subcommittee. Hearings ran through August 22, 1967, calling hundreds of witnesses. Stoner testified that with the correct powder, chrome plating, and proper maintenance, the rifle was as reliable as any service weapon. Colt testified it had warned the Army about ball powder and pushed for chrome plating. Internal Colt memoranda shown to the committee suggested the company predicted extraction failures months before they erupted in Vietnam. Ordnance officers admitted they hadn't properly tested ball powder, hadn't issued cleaning kits and manuals, and had promoted the self-cleaning claim without evidence. The subcommittees. October 19, 1967. Report, nearly 600 pages, blamed Army mismanagement and neglect, using unusually harsh language and suggesting the failure to act bordered on criminal negligence. Yet no one was truly held accountable. Corrections came fast. The Army moved to chrome-plated hod chambers and bores, shifted to improved powder, manufactured and distributed millions of cleaning kits, issued a comic book-style maintenance manual, and mandated training. 10 rifle changes produced the M16A1, standardized on February 28, 1967, even as the public accounting of the crisis continued. By late 1968, malfunction rates fell to normal military levels. With the right ammunition, plating, and maintenance, soldiers found the rifle light, accurate, controllable, and finally reliable. The design survived the bureaucracy that nearly killed it. Chapter 5. What Stoner Built After the Storm, and What the World Built From Him, 1969 to 1997 and beyond. The M16 family did not stop evolving. The M16A2 arrived in the 1980s with a heavier barrel, improved rear sights, and a brass deflector. The M16A4 followed in the 1990s with a flat-top receiver and Picatinny rail for optics. In 1994, the military adopted the M4 carbine, a shorter rifle with a 14.5-inch barrel and collapsible stock. The M4 would become the dominant frontline weapon, but its bones remained unmistakably Stoner. Straight line layout, aluminum receiver, modularity, and the same gas architecture. Stoner himself kept designing. After Armalite sold the AR-15 rights, he worked as a hot consultant for Colt in 1961, then moved to Cadillac Gauge, where in 1962 to 1963 he created the Stoner 63-HA modular weapons system, configurable as rifle, carbine, or light machine gun. The U.S. Navy SEALs adopted it for limited Vietnam use. About 4,000 X were made between 1963 and 1971. In 1971, Stoner co-founded Ars Incorporated in Port Clinton, Ohio, developing improved Stoner 63 variants like the Stoner 86 and experimenting with ideas far ahead of their era. Polymer ammunition, telescoping cartridges, and concaseless systems, concepts considered too radical at the time but influential later. In 1990, at 60 he joined Knight's Armament Company in Titusville, Florida, designing the SR-25, essentially a scaled-up AR pattern rifle chambered in a 7.62 NATO. It blended precision rifle accuracy with familiar handling and was adopted by the U.S. Navy as the Mark 11 Mod sniper system, later praised in Iraq and Afghanistan. In a way, it validated a circle Stoner had opened decades earlier, the AR-10 dream, reborn with maturity. That same May 1990, Stoner met Mikhail Kalashnikov in Washington. Two designers whose rifles had armed opposite sides of global conflicts walked together through the NRA's National Firearms Museum, shot each other's weapons at a Virginia range, and visited Quantico to observe testing. By accounts in the narrative, they left as friends, two men solving the same problem with different philosophies, Kalashnikov favoring rugged simplicity, Stoner chasing lightweight precision. Stoner died of cancer on April 24, 1997. 74 Farast, reportedly still working on a design in his Florida garage until illness stopped him. He was buried at Quantico National Cemetery. He left behind his wife, Barbara, married, 1965, 4 children from his first marriage, 7 grandchildren, and 4 great-grandchildren. Despite designing what became the most prolific American military rifle family, he left. No significant estate. Royalties were modest, and he spent his life working inside companies rather than owning them. His legacy split into 2 massive realities. Militarily, the M16 and its descendants served in every major U.S. conflict since Vietnam. Grenada, Panama, the Persian Gulf, Somalia, Bosnia, Kosovo, Afghanistan, Iraq, and were adopted by more than 80 nations, with licensed production in places such as South Korea, Singapore, and the Philippines. Derivatives like Taiwan's T-65, Canada's C-70, and Britain's L-85A1 are cited in the narrative as tracing lineage back to the AR concept. The rifle changed doctrine. Planners shifted from 400-600-yard assumptions toward the under 300-yard reality, emphasizing fire and maneuver, suppressive fire, and rapid assault. Logistics changed, too. Lighter, 5.86 mates. Loads let soldiers carry more rounds for the same weight, sustaining longer fights and enabling helicopter-borne air assault operations that heavier ammunition burdens would have constrained. Civilian America, meanwhile, turned the platform into a cultural fault line. The narrative cites more than 30 million AR-15 cars in American homes and notes, 10 states cars with varying restrictions or bans. Even Stoner's intent is contested. His family publicly stated he designed it for military use, not civilian life, and believed he would have been horrified by association with mass shootings, while others argue he would have supported civilian ownership, pointing to his broader firearms work. Either way, the rifle became symbolic. For some, a banner of rights, for others, a symbol of violence. And threaded through all of it is the cautionary lesson Vietnam carved into the record. The early M16 disaster was not presented here as a failure of engineering, but as a failure of institutions. Design changes without understanding, warnings ignored, essential specs cut to save money, and soldiers sent into combat without training or cleaning tools. The Congressional report described negligence so severe it nearly crossed into criminal territory. Yet no one was truly punished. The design endured. The bureaucracy didn't learn fast enough. Decades later, replacement programs came and went, often concluding that no alternative offered enough advantage to justify a total switch. Even as newer rifles emerge, the Stoner pattern remains the baseline comparison, the standard that refuses to vanish. From a Go-Sport birth certificate in 1922 to rifles still defining infantry warfare generations later, the through line is stark. A self-taught machinist questioned what experts called impossible, and the world reorganized itself around the answer.